Welcome back to Racing Rundown. This is the first of three videos that we're going to have this week on racing upcoming this weekend. We have the usual segment of Racing Rundown around the world. This week we are going to be talking about the Darley July Cup at Newmarket, part of the Newmarket July meet. And of course, we have the two final grade ones of this spring-summer meet at Belmont Park for 2022, the Belmont Derby and the Belmont Oaks. Today we're talking about the Belmont Derby, I guess you can call this the feature of the two races. This race is super difficult, super wide open. I'm excited for this race. I'm excited for the New York Turf Triple Series. If you were a listener last year on Racing Rundown, you know that we played this series really, really well, both in terms of the win picks and the underneath stuff. And, just me personally, I played a lot of stuff really well in terms of the way that I just bet the races. Personally, separate from Racing Rundown. So I'm very excited to have these races back. For this Belmont Derby, we've got 13 horses. We're going to go through all of them. Obviously, we'll spend some more time on some than others, but I'm going to try to give you something for every horse in here and look at their chances and tell you what I think about them going into the race. And the first horse that we're going to get to is Implementation, one of a few horses in this race from France. A large amount of Euros. I was pleasantly surprised with the amount of European horses that are in this race. Implementation, though, is one of the horses that I will not be giving too much of a shot to. His form is rather, there's not really a whole lot to write home about. He was beaten 6.5 lengths last time out at Chantilly. He was also behind Machete, who's one of the other French horses in this race, who I don't particularly care for to begin with. And then the fact that he was beaten by Machete in the race at Chantilly back in March, another something to add to that. So not a whole lot that I have to say about Implementation, and that's really the end of it for him. We'll move on now to the number 2 horse, and that is Stolen Base for Mike Maker, the winner of the American Turf on that very weird Churchill Downs turf course. The turf course was playing off the entire meet. Stolen Base probably got the benefit of traveling in the position that you needed to be on that turf course to be able to win the race. But I'm not going to say that Stolen Base is purely a product of that Churchill Downs turf course. He did have some really good runs leading into that American Turf. He had a couple nice stakes placings behind Tiz the Bomb. One of them was behind Tiz the Bomb at Turfway. He didn't run too well in the Jeff Ruby, but he was second to Tiz the Bomb. He did have some trouble in the Battaglia, which was the local prep for the Jeff Ruby at Turfway. And then going back to last year when he was a 2-year-old, very, very good runner-up when he was super wide in the Bourbon at Keeneland. And then he ran credible in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf at Del Mar back in 2021. He's a pretty decent price in this race, too. As you can see, the morning line, he is 10-1. So there's certainly things to like about Tiz the Bomb in this race. The one issue with him is outside of that Churchill race, he does not have too many wins to his credit, only a maiden victory. Now, he's a good horse, but this is certainly the toughest group that he's gone up against in his career, and I think that there are better ways to make money in this race outside of Tiz the Bomb, and I don't like him on top in this race, so I decided to go elsewhere in this race. But there is the angle for Tiz the Bomb to run a really strong race in here, even if he doesn't run a winning effort. Now we're going to move on to number 3, the first, or the only Chad Brown horse, excuse me, I'm mixing it up with the Belmont Oaks, and that is Napoleonic War, one of 2 horses in this race for Peter Brandt, the only horse that Peter Brandt owns outside of a partnership. And Napoleonic War had a really nice runner-up effort last time behind Emmanuel in the Pennine Ridge. And Emmanuel in that race certainly tripped out, got the run of the race, a very easy pace to run into. And Napoleonic War was running against that trip that Emmanuel got in the Pennine Ridge Stakes. And before that, he did have he had a weird trip in the Transylvania. I didn't think that race played too well for him. He got stuck, had to shuffle at points in the race. That being said, he hasn't put together a win at the stakes level, and Chad Brown is obviously always very dangerous in these races, but I would feel better about Napoleonic War if he had produced a win at the graded stakes level, and that's kind of a nitpick for him, and it doesn't feel like a great nitpick, given that he is a quality horse, and I think the extra distance is certainly not going to be a bad thing for him. But I just I have to pick against. I can't pick every horse in this race, obviously. I have to pick against horses in certain ways and find things that may not be the greatest angle against horses, but that's kind of where I am with Napoleonic War. We'll move on now to the number 2 horse in this race. And that, or excuse me, the number 4 horse in this race. I'm sorry, wrong numbering there. And that is Classic Causeway. If you remember him from the 2022 Kentucky Derby Trail, very odd that he shows up in this race, but it makes sense if you look at him purely from a pedigree standpoint. Obviously, a son of Giants Causeway who did most of his good running on the turf, and Eric talked about this horse on Racing Rundown, and at least in terms of the context of this race. Obviously, if you're a Racing Rundown listener, you know that we've had plenty of things to say about Classic Causeway, but Classic Causeway actually had a full sister who was a winner on the turf, so he can get the distance, or I mean, not the distance, I'm sorry. He can get the surface in this race. I'm not quite sure about the distance, but he can get the surface of this race. But outside of that, I don't really know what to say about Classic Causeway for this race. He's certainly, I think the most that he's going to do is he's going to be a pace presence here. Eric does think there's a slight chance that he can run an okay race here. I think that more so than anything else, if you're picking a horse off the pace in this race, you're going to have Classic Causeway go and be forwardly placed in this race, which for the most part he breaks. Now, he didn't break in the Kentucky Derby, but in most of his other races he breaks, and obviously we've seen he's got a ton of speed. So as long as he breaks and sends, I think he has enough to keep up with Emmanuel, and that's really going to be the big thing is Emmanuel going to get handed the race, or is Classic Causeway going to be able to keep Emmanuel honest? And I think if he is able to do that, then that could benefit some of the horses coming from off the pace in this race. Going to move on now to the next horse, the first of the Todd Pletcher pair in here, and that is Grand Sonata, the graded stakes winner, who has not won since he won the Kitten's Joy Stakes at Gulfstream, but has run a couple of strong races in his 2 lead-up races into this race. And the thing that I like about Grand Sonata coming into this race is he's going to get more distance here. Obviously, being a son of Medaglia d'Oro out of an AP Indy mare, you know that distance is certainly going to be his friend here. And I thought he was a little bit too far back last time out in the Audubon Stakes. And, that wasn't a race that a horse on the lead had the race handed to him in, but he was certainly much further back in that race than I thought he needed to be. But he did run a credible effort there. The horses that finished in front of him, I actually really like Smokin' Tea as a horse. I would have liked to have seen him run here. I know he ran in the Manila and didn't give a strong impression, but I really liked Smokin' Tea exiting that race, excuse me. And then there were things to like about Keto Dan, the upset winner there. If you remember that episode where we talked about Keto Dan, there were certainly things to like about him. And then Grand Sonata ran a very credible race in the Transylvania. That was off a slight break there, and I thought that it was a weird effort there, but I thought it obviously, because I picked him in the Audubon, I thought that was going to be a good lead-up race into the Audubon. It was not, but I think Grand Sonata, if things play the way that I think they could, he's certainly a board hitter type in here. I'm going to be fully transparent. There's 6 or 7 horses that I'm going to be playing in some facet in this race when I'm at the racetrack. I'm going to limit myself to 3 in this race just for the sake of Racing Rundown, but there are so many horses that I want to bet, that I can see myself betting, and Grand Sonata is certainly one of those horses, and it's going to be difficult to find ways to not load up a bunch of money onto Pletcher's horses, and specifically Grand Sonata in this race. Now we're going to move on to another European. I referenced him earlier. That is Machete, who is coming out of a couple races in which he ran behind the French Derby winner Vidani, including in that aforementioned French Derby. I don't particularly like Machete too much in this race. If you remember last week on Racing Rundown Around the World, I didn't have too many nice things to say about Vidani. He did win the Eclipse Stakes, but should be mentioned that in that Eclipse, he was very much benefited by the poor ride that Mishriff received from David Egan there, and I don't think that he was the best horse there in that Eclipse. And outside of Vidani, I mean, Modern Games is a good miler, but Modern Games is going too far, and there is nothing really too much underneath in the French Derby that really gave me too much of an indication to be, overly, to feel overly good about that field. So I don't have too many good things to say about Machete in this race. Obviously, I talked about implementation. I don't like him. Don't like Machete, so I'm going to leave them out. Europe is certainly difficult to read in this race, but I have to leave some horses out, and these are the horses that I'm going to be leaving out in here. We're going to move on now to the number 7 horse in this race, and that is Side Dog for trainer Graham Motion, a stakes winner at Aqueduct back during the winter, and then he won that Transylvania Stakes at Keeneland. And he's a horse that I like a lot, and I sound like a broken record, but I like a lot of these horses, but I have to find a reason not to use them one way or another. And Side Dog, I just, it's purely just a preference thing here. Now, I thought that his run in the American turf was good, and it's been a very profitable angle if you just throw out horses from Churchill Downs that didn't run well in their stakes races on the turf there, and then in a next start or in a subsequent start, you get them on a better playing turf course. That's been a very profitable angle, and I'm not going to even try to predict where the market's going to go in this race, but I think Side Dog could float up in this race just a little bit, coming out of I'm not going to say disappointing effort, but coming out of a defeat in a stakes race, and then with the names that you have showing up in this race, I could certainly see him floating up a little bit. He ran really well in the Transylvania. Obviously, if you like Napoleonic War, I think very highly of Grand Sonata, and he beat both of those two horses on the spot. And he also did that off of a layoff, coming out of a layoff from a 1.16 mile race at Aqueduct back when he was a 3-year-old. And I did pick, and that wasn't a race that we picked on Racing Rundown, but personally, I picked Side Dog in that race. So I thought that he ran very strongly there. And certainly another thing that you can think about him is he is going to do better getting out to more distance. So getting to 1.25 miles, I think, is certainly going to do some good things for him. So I have plenty of good things to say about him, but I have to limit myself. Like I said, I have to limit myself to horses to a few horses in here, but certainly one that personally me on Saturday when I'm playing this race with my own money, I will consider using in whatever wagers I do decide to make. And now we're going to move on to another horse that, if you remember from Racing Rundown Around the World, I had some good things to say about, and that is the number 8 Royal Patronage, coming to this race out of a very disappointing effort at Epsom in the Derby. And I don't really have too many excuses. I don't have any excuses to make for him in that effort from that effort in the Derby. I thought that he was going to run a lot better than that. I can't say a lot better. I didn't pick him to win, but I did say that I liked Royal Patronage for races in the future in that Epsom Derby preview, and he didn't really give a strong impression there. And like I said, there's not really a whole lot that I have to point to as to why he didn't run well. I do think he is also a bit of a wild card in terms of how he plays from a pace perspective in this race, because he did set the pace in the 2000 Guineas, and I think that he could potentially be up there to keep Classic Causeway and Emmanuel honest, and he could potentially be another one of your safety horses in terms of who is going to go up there and be forwardly placed with Emmanuel and Classic Causeway. But I don't think I don't know the likelihood of that happening. I'm not certain of it, and I wouldn't say, I think I'm probably about 50-50 as to whether or not he's going to be forwardly placed in this Belmont Derby. And I've said to people with the way that I've looked at this race, if you're playing anything in this race, or if you're deciding on how to play something in this race, and Royal Patronage being a pace horse is something that is going to be a deciding factor whether or not you play something, err on the side of he's not going to be a pace factor in here, just because that's the way that I would potentially see this race going. We're going to move on now to the number 9 horse in this race, and that is Tiz the Bomb, Eric's pick in this Belmont Derby. Eric was not able to join me for this Belmont Derby preview, but we picked this race on Racing Rundown this afternoon as I'm recording this on Tuesday the 5th. And Tiz the Bomb was Eric's pick. And Tiz the Bomb is a horse that, if you've been listening to Racing Rundown, we have been shouting all winter, spring for this horse to get on the turf. And finally he gets back on it. He's exiting 2 really strong races in the Jeff Ruby and the John Battaglia at Turfway. Obviously, the form from those Turfway races has been spectacular. The Kentucky Derby winner coming out of that, obviously Rich Strike, Tawny Port, and then further down underneath, you get to Stolen Base, who won the American Turf and has a decent chance to run well here. So not Stolen Base, Tiz the Bomb has really good form from his races on the synthetic, and then you go back to his runs last year in the fall, a very, very strong runner-up effort behind Modern Games, the French Guineas winner in the Juvenile Turf. He beat Stolen Base in a very strong effort in the Bourbon as well. So there is plenty to like about Tiz the Bomb in here. I think that this is a very evenly matched race, by the way. I've kind of been giving that indication all throughout this video, but I don't think that this is a case of Europe comes over here and it's a procession for them. I think that the Americans have a very, very strong chance in this race, and Tiz the Bomb on paper is the best of the Americans. I didn't pick him in this race, but I absolutely understand why anyone would like Tiz the Bomb in this race, because the form is certainly there for him, and I think he is going to run a very strong race in this Belmont Derby. And now we're going to move on to the number 10 horse in this race, and that is Nation's Pride, the Godolphin Charlie Appleby entrant in this race. And Nation's Pride was very well backed going into the Derby at Epsom. He won the Newmarket Stakes a couple days before Desert Crown won the Dante, and I remember Nation's Pride was all of a sudden the buzz horse for Epsom, and he might have been the horse that went off favored there, and he was very well backed at Epsom, and he ran a okay race there. But when he won that race at Newmarket, that was also, should be mentioned, he won that by 7 lengths over Huyamal, who was the runner-up at Epsom. And, you know, Nation's Pride didn't run bad at Epsom. I did say at the time I didn't really like him too much for the Derby, but I do like him a lot for this race. I think that him and Stone Age are relatively evenly matched with each other, and I am kind of doing something that I don't love to do in terms of the angle that I'm playing, but I'm playing sort of a trainer angle, and that is because Charlie Appleby, when he ships over here to the United States for a race, his form is insanely good when he ships over here for races in the United States. And I think, Nation's Pride and Stone Age relatively evenly matched with each other. Stone Age finished in front of Nation's Pride at Epsom, but it wasn't by that much, all things considered. I think Nation's Pride has a really strong chance to win this race. He's going to be my pick in this spot just because of the effort that he had at Newmarket in that Newmarket Stakes, and then the success that Charlie Appleby has in the United States. He picks up Frankie Dettori for this race, so that's never a bad thing as well. And like I said, the pick for him, or the pick for me in this race, is Nation's Pride, the Godolphin Charlie Appleby entrant in this spot. Now we're going to move on to the second of 2 Tide Pletcher horses in this race, and that is Emmanuel, the winner of the local prep, the Pennine Ridge. And Emmanuel was very, very good in that Pennine Ridge, and Emmanuel's very dangerous in this race because he could potentially be lone speed. Now, the way that we drew this race up on Racing Rundown was we had Emmanuel and Classic Causeway just a little bit off of him, keeping him honest. But Classic Causeway didn't break in the Kentucky Derby, and I think the odds are more likely than not that Classic Causeway will break. But if Classic Causeway doesn't break, or if for some reason he doesn't make the lead and Emmanuel is lone speed, that is very, very dangerous in this spot. And I think an extra 1/8 of a mile is not going to be a bad thing for Emmanuel in this spot. He has a very, very big chance in this race. And I feel like I'm a broken record saying all these horses have a very big chance. And, it's like, oh, well, you're just saying the same thing about the whole field. But this is a very evenly matched field, folks. It is very difficult to separate these horses. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about this race. But the negative on Emmanuel is that there could potentially be other horses that send at him. And not that that's going to tire him out, but I think that could give a slight bit of edge to, or not edge, but take the edge that Emmanuel has off of your Nation's Prides, your Stone Ages, and some of your Americans in this spot. Take a little bit of that edge off of him. But if we're talking about a situation where Emmanuel is lone speed, good luck trying to catch him, because he was very difficult to run down last time in the Pennine Ridge, and he would be very difficult in this spot too, in the event he gets a lone lead. We're going to move on now to the number 12 horse in this race. We're getting close to the end of this. And Limited Liability for Shook McGahee is the number 12 horse in this race. A horse that I really liked exiting that Pennine Ridge Stakes. He's the third runner from the Pennine Ridge, third of the 3 runners that we have in this race. And Limited Liability, I said about him after that race that I would really like to get him out to further distances. Now, the race that I said that I would really like him for was the Jockey Club Derby. Not that I don't like him in this spot, but I think 1.5 miles would be even better for this horse. But giving him an extra 1/8 of a mile, that extra furlong, it would certainly benefit him if there is a slight amount of pace in here, because that would make it so that Emmanuel is not walking the dog in here. But I really liked the runner-up effort, or excuse me, the third place effort that he had there in that Pennine Ridge Stakes. And I think he has a very, very big chance to hit the board in this race. I would not pick him to win, but I would use him underneath in some kind of a trifecta or superfecta, any of your kind of exotics. Maybe if you're playing a multi-race wager, if you have an extra horse, Limited Liability might not be the worst horse to throw in, because I think he'll float, and I think at the right price, he's certainly worth some kind of a wager in this race. And now we're going to move on to the final horse, number 13 in here, and that is Stone Age for Aidan O'Brien. Another horse that at one point might have been the favorite for the Epsom Derby, was not the favorite in there, and he was well backed at Epsom for the Derby. And I didn't like Stone Age going into the Epsom Derby. If you remember what I said about him, I said he was very Bolshoi ballet-y in terms of he had a nice win going into. Now, they weren't exactly mirror images. The quality of their victories were different, but in terms of the way that I thought he was going to get played, Stone Age I thought was very similar to Bolshoi Ballet. And if I'm comparing him to Bolshoi Ballet, then that kind of gives the indication I think he can win this race. Now, can he win this race? Sure, I'd be a fool to say that he has no chance in this spot, but I don't particularly like him here just because I wasn't super crazy about the victory that he had in the Derby trial. And while he did finish in front of my pick at Epsom, I wasn't entirely convinced that says that he's 100% better than Nation's Pride. And the other thing is I don't love Ryan Moore riding at Belmont Park. Ryan Moore, while he is a world-class jockey, does tend to do some things wrong at Belmont Park. He came very close to getting Santa Barbara and Bolshoi Ballet beaten last year at Belmont Park. Santa Barbara, the Belmont Oaks, was a lot closer than it needed to be. So I'm going to play against, I hate to say this, but largely because of Ryan Moore, I'm going to be playing against Stone Age in this spot. But if you like him, it makes a lot of sense because Aidan O'Brien usually tends to spot his North American horses pretty well when he sends them over here. And with that being said, that is going to lead us into my picks for this race. So as I mentioned, Nation's Pride is my pick in this Belmont Derby. Like I said, the factor that he had a really nice effort at Newmarket, Charlie Appleby factor, makes it very much so that I gotta pick him on top in this race. And I'm gonna go 2 Americans for the second and third spots in here. You could throw a dartboard to make a trifecta in here and have a very good shot of having it hit, but I'm gonna take the 2 horses that I gave a bunch of love to, and that's Grand Sonata and Limited Liability. I'm going to throw them at the bottom of that trifecta on top of Nation's Pride, and we're going to see how well that plays out. Hopefully we were able to help. I was able to help you out with something in this race, give you some kind of an insight on the horses in this spot. Again, this is a very evenly matched race. I would not be surprised if any of these horses, maybe save a couple of the French horses, but maybe 10 or 11 of these 13 could win this race, and I would not be surprised. I'm excited for this race. I've been looking forward to it for over a month and a half now. Hopefully we'll be able to get something good from this, and hopefully you enjoyed this video and you'll be back with us when we preview the Belmont Oaks later